Hello, everybody. So we're going to start our. Last week we focused on arc welding, and this week we're going to focus on wire feed welding. So I want to take a step back though to arc welding for a second, and some of the issues I saw with some of the work coming in from many of you was you had a tough time understanding, what the flux is for and shielding and all that. So I'm going to break that down again for us here one more time. So when the puddle, and the puddle is our molten pool of metal, when that puddle is exposed to air, oxygen wants to try to get into that puddle because it's hot and oxygen likes to burn, and so oxygen will be attracted to that puddle. And if oxygen gets into that puddle, it makes it porous, it fills it with pinholes. And our weld is like a big honeycomb then instead of being a solid piece of steel. So just to show you what I'm talking about here, this would be a weld that was done that had no shielding. So if you look, you can see those tiny pinholes, and you can even see the middle of it there, how it's full of those holes, okay? Now this is a weld with shielding. You can see there's no pinholes. It's a nice solid weld. It looks sharp, okay? So the reason for our shielding is because we want a weld like this, not a weld like this. Just simply from a strength perspective, not necessarily, looks aren't that important right now. We're talking about strength here. This weld has no strength at all because you can see it's porous. It's just very crystalline, okay? So when we were arc welding, to keep the oxygen from entering that pool of molten metal, the flux, this coating here around the outside of the rod, as that burned up, it created basically a smoky cloud around the puddle, and that's what kept the oxygen from going in there. Now as the puddle cooled, it crusts over and then the oxygen can't get in there anymore anyway. So we've only got to shield that puddle for a short amount of time. But if we don't shield it at all, you saw what happened with the really porous one. And so when we're talking about shielding the puddle, that's something that we have to do when we're using an arc process. There's no getting around it. Okay. All right. So I'm done talking about shielding here. So last week we talked about arc welding, stick welding, also called SMAW or shielded metal arc welding. Okay. I want to talk about wire feed welding here now. Okay, we're going to change gears here with wire feed welding. And so I've got this wire feed welder here, and we're going to go over the basics today of how this thing actually operates. So you can see in here, you can see in here that we've got this spool of wire, and I've got another spool right here. Of this wire. It comes on a spool. There's spools of different sizes depending on the size machine you have. We could run this smaller spool in here and it wouldn't be a big deal. Obviously a bigger spool has more wire on it, so we can do a lot more with it. But that spool is fed, it's fed into these rollers, and those rollers are attached to a motor, and then the wire gets pushed out through, excuse me here Dina, through this hose all the way out to the end of this gun right here. Okay, and inside this hose is like a metal tube. It's like a metal flexible liner, and that flexible liner carries the current. And so the current comes all the way up here to this tip holder. And you can see when I'll turn the machine on here, and the machine's a little loud because it's got a fan, but luckily I have a loud voice to overpower it. When I pull the trigger on this thing, you'll see the wire gets fed out of this thing as I pull the trigger. Now, right now, our wire is not electrified. Our wire won't be electrified until it comes in contact with the tip holder. And so now we have our welding tip. So if you look at this thing, it's got a little tiny hole in the end of it, and it screws into our contact holder. Okay. Now, when I pull the trigger, the electricity from the tube inside the cord is transferred to the tip, which transfers it to the wire. Once again, we're going to have a complete circuit. So once again, we got a ground clamp, just like we did when we were stick welding, okay? But the difference here is that our arc will automatically be set by this thing, depending on what we set the machine at. Basically, when the wire comes in contact with the metal, it will immediately obliterate in an arc, and we don't have to worry about things like arc length anymore, because the wire will do that for us. That's why people, generally speaking, think that wire feed welding is much easier than stick welding, and really it is. It's much easier to create a bead. Whether you're creating a good weld or not, though, is another story, and that takes practice, and it takes some knowledge of the theory that's actually occurring here. So this brings me to the last thing I want to talk about. Okay, so there's two types of wire feed welding. There's flux core welding, and let's talk about flux core welding for a second. So flux core welding, we basically have everything that's in around the rod right here is in the wire. It's basically put in with the alloy to create that smoky cloud. Okay, and so in flux core welding, our smoky cloud covers our puddle, and it's created, and our weld is protected by the flux that's embedded within the wire. Now the thing about flux core welding, you can do a lot of stuff with it, and it's really easy to do. It doesn't, I mean, it's super easy. But like arc welding or like stick welding, you're going to have a lot of slag, and you're going to have to clean the weld up before you can paint it or do anything else with it. Okay. When we talk about wire feed welding, we also talk about MIG welding. Okay, so MIG is MIG. So now we talk about some new acronyms. MIG is metal inert gas, is what MIG stands for. That's generally when people talk about wire feed welding, they usually are just automatically going to MIG welding in their minds. Also called GMAW, gas metal arc welding. Gas metal arc welding can encompass a number of things, and MIG welding is one of them. Okay. So now in this case, now we're using a shielding gas to actually shield our puddle. Instead of creating a smoky cloud like we were here, or if we had flux core wire, we're going to be using a shielding gas to protect our puddle. In this case, Dina, can you catch this tank right here? In this case, we're going to be using carbon dioxide, a mixture of carbon dioxide and argon. So that carbon dioxide and argon is actually plumbed here into the machine, and it's going to go out through this hose with the wire. And if you look right here at the end where our contact tip goes into, we have these little tiny holes right here, here, and here on this contact tip holder. The contact tip holder in this case is also our diffuser, it's called, and the diffuser will put a cloud of gas right around this contact tip and around our weld. It's held in there by our nozzle. So this is our nozzle. If you look, our nozzle's actually insulated. There's plastic insulation all the way around it. Our nozzle's insulated, and our nozzle goes until our tip is just inside of it or flush with the end. And so then when I pull the trigger on this thing now, if I turn the gas on, I can turn this. I'll turn the gas on. I pull the trigger on this thing now. The wire comes out. A puff of gas also comes out along with the wire to protect the weld as we're welding. So now we have gas around our pool. Instead of using a flux, we're using a shielding gas instead. Okay. So just to show you the difference here. Or I don't have a good difference one, I guess. But this is a weld that's done with MIG welding. I haven't wire brushed it. I haven't done anything to it. This is just the finished product right here. You can see there's no slag on it, hardly any splatter. It produces just a really, really nice weld that's really easy to clean up, and all it takes is pretty much a little bit of wire brush to get rid of a little bit of this soot right here, and it's ready for paint. That's the advantage of MIG welding, is that you can produce really nice clean welds, and and do them quite easily. MIG welding is fantastic for producing nice clean welds. Okay, okay, that's it for this video, everybody. Have a great day.